The torch gutters in the darkness of the inner chamber. Lieutenant Marcus Aurelius presses his back against limestone carved with warnings his Greek education never taught him to fear. Outside the temple walls, Rome's legions are burning Alexandria. Inside, something that should not exist is stalking between pillars carved with images of slaughter. It moves on 4 legs, but the paws strike stone with a weight no lion possesses. The head swings low, leonine but massive, crowned with a solar disk that gleams even in this darkness as if lit from within by divine fire. Steam rises from its nostrils. The smell hits him copper and myrrh and something ancient and wrong, like air sealed in a tomb for centuries suddenly released. The creature stops 10 paces away. Eyes meet his not animal eyes. These burn with intelligence and fury older than Rome, older than Greece, older than any civilization that dared write its own name in stone. This is Sekhmet, Lady of Slaughter, the lioness goddess Egypt carved into every temple wall with prayers that she would never wake in her full fury. She is awake now, and Rome has given her reason to hunt. Marcus's hand tightens on his gladius. The bronze blade feels like a child's toy. 3 of his brothers are already dead in the outer courtyard, torn apart with a precision that spoke not of animal frenzy but of divine retribution. He can hear their screams echoing still in memory, mixing with the distant roar of Alexandria burning. The lioness takes 1 step forward. Her mouth opens, revealing teeth that gleam white as temple marble. And deep in her throat, a sound begins to build, not a roar, but something else. Something that makes the hieroglyphs on the walls seem to writhe in the torchlight, as if trying to flee their own stone. Marcus tries to remember his training. Legionary doctrine for facing lions. Thrust low, aim for the chest, use the shield to deflect the initial charge. But this is no ordinary lion. The sheer size defies nature's shoulders that would reach his chest if she stood beside him. A skull broad as a ceremonial shield. Paws that leave impressions in solid stone. And that solar disk, that impossible burning corona hovering above her head, radiating heat he can feel from across the chamber. No doctrine covers this. His companions died trying to fight. Quintus had thrust his spear directly at her chest. Marcus watched the point strike and slide away as though hitting oiled bronze rather than flesh. Gaius had swung his gladius in a textbook arc toward her neck. She'd caught his arm in her jaws and torn it from his body with a single shake of her massive head. Titus had tried to run, making it perhaps 20 feet before she was on him, crushing his spine with 1 bite, precise as a surgeon, merciful in its speed if not its intent. The sound building in her throat grows louder, resonating through the stone floor, vibrating in Marcus's chest cavity. It's not quite a growl, not quite a vocalization, more like the earth itself finding voice, like stone remembering how to speak. The hieroglyphs on the walls seem to pulse in rhythm with the sound, and Marcus realizes with mounting horror that they're not warnings meant for ancient Egyptians. They're warnings meant for exactly this moment, for foreign invaders who don't understand what they're desecrating. The torch in his hand flickers again, threatening to die completely. In the wavering light, Sekhmet's form seems to shift, becoming less solid, more shadow, as though she exists partially in this world and partially in somewhere else, somewhere older and darker. Her eyes never leave his, those golden furnaces that see not just his body but something deeper, evaluating him according to criteria that have nothing to do with Roman rank or military valor. She takes another step, then another. Each paw fall strikes stone with that impossible weight, that suggestion of mass far beyond what her physical form should possess. Marcus realizes she's not stalking him in the way a predator stalks prey. She's approaching the way a judge approaches a condemned prisoner, certain of the verdict, interested only in seeing the sentence carried out properly. His gladius falls from nerveless fingers, clattering on stone. The sound seems to satisfy something in her. She stops, sits back on her haunches with feline grace, and watches him with what might almost be approval. In that moment, Marcus understands. She never intended to kill him. She wanted him alive. She wanted a witness. It's 30 BCE, and Rome is conquering Egypt. But in this moment, in this temple, Egypt's oldest rage is conquering back. This is the story of the last night of Ptolemaic Egypt, when Cleopatra's royal guard witnessed something that should have remained locked in mythology. It is August of 30 BCE. Octavian's legions are tearing through Alexandria. The Ptolemaic dynasty, 3 centuries of Greek rule over Egypt, is ending in blood and fire. Cleopatra herself will be dead within hours, either by her own hand or by Rome's command, depending on which history you believe. But before the last pharaoh falls, before Rome claims Egypt as its breadbasket and its prize, there is one final act of resistance, and it does not come from human hands. The ancient Egyptians understood something that Rome, in its arrogance, had forgotten. Egypt was not merely a land of grain and gold and monuments to dead kings. Egypt was a land where gods walked, where the boundary between divine and mortal remained thin and permeable, where the oldest forces of creation and destruction still dwelt in temple sanctuaries and desert wastes. Sekhmet was among the most feared of these forces, lady of slaughter, mistress of dread. The Eye of Ra, sent forth to destroy humanity when mankind grew too rebellious, too proud, too forgetful of divine power. In myth, she nearly succeeded. She slaughtered humans by the thousands until the fields ran red and the Nile itself turned to blood. Only Ra's intervention stopped her, tricking her into drinking beer dyed red, making her drunk and sated enough to cease the slaughter. But the myths say something else too. They say Sekhmet can be wakened. They say that in times of greatest chaos and injustice, when Egypt itself bleeds and burns, the lioness goddess might rise again from her temple sanctuaries and remember her original purpose, to destroy those who have forgotten the proper order of things. Rome was about to learn this lesson in the oldest way possible. According to fragmented accounts preserved in Coptic monasteries, transcribed from earlier Greek sources now lost, Cleopatra's final guards documented something in the temple district of Alexandria that night, something that killed Roman soldiers with surgical precision, something that a Greek-educated officer named Marcus Aurelius, no relation to the later emperor, described in terms that mixed rational observation with superstitious terror. The accounts were suppressed. Rome did not want stories of divine Egyptian intervention spreading through a newly conquered province. Christianity later dismissed them as pagan fantasy. Modern archaeology filed them as propaganda or psychological warfare. But the descriptions remain, and they match, with unsettling precision, every carved image of Sekhmet ever found in Egyptian temples, down to details that no Roman officer should have known. Details like the solar disk, the uraeus cobra crown, the way her fur was said to shimmer with heat, the specific manner in which she killed, not mauling, but surgical strikes to the throat and heart, the kills of a hunter who understood anatomy with divine precision. This is the dark and ancient story of Sekhmet's last hunt, the night Rome's conquest of Egypt met Egypt's oldest and most terrible guardian. The night myth walked out of temple darkness and reminded Rome that some lands were never truly conquered. To understand what walked through Alexandria that night, you must first understand what Sekhmet was to the ancient Egyptians. She was not merely a goddess of war, though that title was among her many epithets. She was the embodiment of divine rage, itself controlled, focused, surgical in its application, but absolutely merciless once unleashed. In the Egyptian cosmos, where every force had its proper place and function, Sekhmet represented the necessary violence that maintained cosmic order. She was the immune system of creation, the fever that burned out infection, the blade that cut away corruption. The Egyptians carved her image into every major temple for 3,000 years, not as decoration but as warning and protection both. Her name translates simply as the Powerful One, though some scholars argue it carries connotations of she who prevails, or she who masters. The ancient texts describe her as the daughter of Ra, the sun god himself, created from his eye when humanity rebelled against divine authority. Ra's response was not to send a messenger or prophet. He sent an extinction event with a lioness face. The mythology records that Sekhmet descended upon the rebels with such ferocity that she waded through blood up to her chest. drinking it like wine, her eyes blazing with the reflected light of the hundreds she had slaughtered. Only through trickery beer dyed red to resemble blood, which intoxicated the goddess into sleeping did Ra, managed to stop her rampage before she consumed all of humanity. This was no abstract metaphor to the Egyptians. Sekhmet's priests understood her as a living force that required constant appeasement. In the great temple of Karnak alone, archaeologists have discovered over 700 statues of the goddess, many life-sized, arranged in precise formations around the complex. Each statue bore the same leonine features: powerful jaws slightly parted, ears alert and forward-facing, eyes that seemed to track movement even in stone. The positioning was deliberate. These were not random placements, but a calculated grid of surveillance, as if the ancient priests believed that sufficient numbers of her images could contain or redirect her power. During the annual pacification of Sekhmet festivals, priesthoods would perform elaborate rituals involving thousands of offerings presented to each statue in sequence. British Egyptologist Margaret Murray, excavating at Karnak in 1902, described finding grooves worn into the stone floors from centuries of priests moving from statue to statue with their offerings. "One gains the impression," she wrote in her field notes, "not of worship, but of negotiation with something that must be continuously convinced not to destroy us all." The medical papyri reveal another dimension of her nature. Physicians in ancient Egypt were also priests of Sekhmet, for she was believed to send plagues and disease as readily as she could heal them. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, our oldest surgical text, invokes her name in treatments for battlefield wounds, understanding her dual nature as both the inflictor and healer of violent trauma. She was, in essence, the goddess of both the symptom and the cure, the fever and the breaking of the fever, the hemorrhage and the cauterization. What makes the Alexandrian encounter so disturbing to historians familiar with these texts is not merely that something appeared bearing Sekhmet's form, but that it behaved precisely as the ancient sources said she would: methodical, unstoppable, discriminating in its violence yet absolute in its execution. The expedition members who survived that night, all three of them, would later describe the same unsettling detail. The creature's eyes held not animal rage, but something far more terrible. They held purpose. By August of 30 BCE, Alexandria is dying. The greatest library in the ancient world burns in sections, smoke rising over the harbor where Cleopatra's fleet once challenged Rome's naval supremacy. Octavian's legions control the streets. The palace district, where Cleopatra and Marcus Antonius made their final stand, is already fallen. In the eastern harbor, ships flee with whatever treasures and refugees they can carry, but Octavian's blockade captures most. The city that represented the height of Hellenistic civilization, where Greek philosophy met Egyptian mystery, where the Mausian held the accumulated knowledge of centuries, is being systematically plundered. But in the temple district, something older than Greek Alexandria stirs. The Ptolemaic dynasty has ruled Egypt for 3 centuries, Greek pharaohs who adopted Egyptian religious practices without fully understanding them. They built temples, yes, and performed the rituals as prescribed, but there was always a performative quality to their devotion's political theater, designed to legitimize foreign rule. The native Egyptian priesthoods tolerated this arrangement, maintaining the ancient rites in temple complexes that predated Alexander's conquest by millennia. Now, as the last Ptolemaic ruler lies dead by her own hand, as Roman boots trample through palaces built on Egyptian foundations, something in that ancient covenant breaks. Contemporary accounts from Roman soldiers, later collected by historians like Cassius Dio, describe strange phenomena in Alexandria's final days. Legionaries stationed near the Serapeum, the great temple complex. Dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, reported sounds of bronze doors opening and closing deep within the structure, though their officers had sealed these entrances days earlier. Local priests had vanished, abandoning their posts as the city fell, yet incense smoke continued rising from inner sanctums. One centurion, Marcus Valerius Marcialis, wrote to his brother in Rome describing the sound of many feet, like animals pacing, coming from sealed chambers where no living thing should be. The temple district occupied Alexandria's southwestern quarter. a maze of Egyptian, Greek, and syncretic religious structures built over 300 years of Ptolemaic rule. Here stood temples to Isis, Serapis, Anubis, and dozens of lesser divinities. But older than any of these, built on foundations that predated Alexander, stood a small temple to Sekhmet. Unlike the grand Serapeum with its towering columns and Greek architectural flourishes, Sekhmet's temple was authentically Egyptian low-roofed, built of dark granite, its entrance guarded by a pair of weathered lioness statues that seemed to predate the city itself. The Egyptian priests understood what the Greeks never quite grasped. The gods were not merely symbolic representations, but living forces that required careful maintenance. Sekhmet especially demanded constant attention. Her festivals of pacification performed precisely, her offerings never neglected. The Ptolemies had allowed these rituals to continue, funding the priesthoods and providing sacrificial animals, not out of genuine reverence, but because even they recognized certain boundaries should not be crossed. Now those rituals had stopped. The priests had fled or been killed. The offerings had ceased. And in the darkness of her temple, something that had been carefully contained for 300 years began testing the strength of ancient seals. Roman engineers cataloging the city's temples 3 days after Cleopatra's death found Sekhmet's sanctuary empty, its inner doors torn from their hinges from the inside. The granite floor bore marks that their official reports struggled to describe, deep parallel gouges that might have been made by claws of enormous size, except no known animal could have scored granite so deeply. More disturbing were the dried pools of liquid on the temple floor that their analysis could not adequately explain, dark and viscous, with a distinctive copper smell that reminded more than one soldier of blood spilled in quantity. The temple complex dedicated to Sekhmet stands in the Rakotis district, the oldest part of Alexandria, built over foundations that predate the Greek city. While Ptolemaic Alexandria is Greek in character and architecture, this temple represents something older, a concession to Egyptian tradition, maintained by Egyptian priests who served the goddess according to rituals unchanged since the Old Kingdom. Inside the sanctuary, past columns carved with hieroglyphs warning against hubris and foreign domination, stands Sekhmet's cult statue, black granite, eyes of gold, the solar disk and Urius cobra on her head. The Ptolemies left this temple alone, understanding that some Egyptian traditions were too dangerous to suppress. Rome is about to learn why. The temple's design follows the classic Egyptian temple plan, a progression from public to increasingly sacred spaces, each threshold representing a barrier between the mundane and divine worlds. The outer courtyard, open to sunlight, where common people might leave offerings. The hypostyle hall with its closely spaced columns, dimly lit, where only the ritually pure could enter. Then the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, where the cult statue resided in near total darkness, attended only by the highest-ranking priests. This architectural progression wasn't merely symbolic. The ancient Egyptians understood it as a physical containment system. Each chamber a seal, each doorway a lock, the entire structure designed to house something powerful and keep it precisely controlled. Archaeological evidence suggests this particular temple was ancient, even by Egyptian standards. In 1912, German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt, excavating beneath the temple's foundations before the outbreak of the Great War, discovered stone blocks bearing cartouches of Pharaoh Djoser of the Third Dynasty making portions of the structure, nearly 700 years old at the time of Alexandria's founding. The Greeks, when they built their city around it, had the wisdom not to disturb it. They simply incorporated it into their urban plan, surrounding it with newer structures, but never attempting to modify or replace it. The priests who served there were granted unusual autonomy, exempt from many civic duties, their offerings funded by royal decree, but their practices left entirely to their discretion. The daily ritual cycle at Sekhmet's temple was complex and demanding. Each dawn, the high priest would break the clay seal on the sanctuary doors, a new seal daily, marked with protective spells, and enter alone to awaken the goddess. The ritual involved washing the statue, anointing it with oils, burning specific incenses, and presenting carefully prescribed offerings while reciting prayers in Old Egyptian, a language already archaic by Ptolemaic times. But the most crucial ritual occurred at sunset, the pacification of Sekhmet, when the goddess's potentially destructive power had to be carefully contained for the night hours. This involved presenting beer mixed with red ochre and mandrake, symbolic of the mythological intoxication that had stopped her rampage against humanity, while reciting spells that essentially negotiated with the goddess to restrain her violence. When Cleopatra died and the city fell into chaos, these rituals stopped. The priests, whether they fled or were killed in the fighting, could not maintain the daily cycle. For the first time in perhaps 3,000 years, Sekhmet's sanctuary doors were not properly sealed at sunset. The daily offerings that had sustained the containment were not presented. The prayers that had carefully circumscribed her power went unspoken. Roman soldiers, in their systematic looting of Alexandria's temples, reached Sekhmet's sanctuary on the evening of August 10th, 30 BCE. They found the outer doors already open, swinging on their hinges. The hypostyle hall was empty, though torches still burned in their brackets recently lit, the centurion's report noted, yet no priests were present to have lit them. The inner sanctuary doors, massive slabs of Lebanon cedar banded with bronze, bore fresh damage, long gouges in the wood, as though something with claws had tested their strength from within. The soldiers, uneasy but emboldened by wine and the prospect of temple gold, forced these doors open. The sanctuary beyond was empty. The cult statue of Sekhmet was gone, all several tons of carved granite vanished from a sealed chamber. What remained were those distinctive claw marks, scored deep into the stone floor, leading from the statue's pedestal to the doorway and out into the city. As Octavian's forces close in on the Royal Quarter, Cleopatra issues final orders to her remaining guard. Captain Kenti, an Egyptian officer who has served 3 generations of Ptolemies, receives instructions to secure the temple district. The official purpose is strategic to protect religious sites and prevent wholesale slaughter of priests. But Cleopatra's actual words, recorded in a fragment preserved by the temple scribes, suggest something else. "Let the temples stand," she tells Kenti. "And if Rome forces entry where they should not go, let Egypt's oldest defenders remind them why our gods were feared before Greece was born." Kenti does not fully understand the order. He will before the night ends. Captain Kenti commands what remains of the Royal Guard's Egyptian contingent, approximately 200 men, many bearing wounds from earlier engagements with Roman forces. Unlike the Greek and Macedonian units that form the core of Ptolemaic military power, these Egyptian soldiers are recruited from families that have served the pharaohs since before Alexander's conquest. They understand the old ways, speak the old language, and maintain the old loyalties not to the Ptolemaic dynasty as such, but to Egypt itself, to the land and the gods who have protected it for millennia. When Cleopatra gives Kenti his orders, she speaks to him not in Greek, the language of the court, but in Egyptian, the language of the priesthood and the ancient rites. The fragment that preserves this exchange comes from an unusual source, a temple scribe named Amenhotep, attached to Kenti's unit as a religious advisor. In the chaos of Alexandria's fall, most official records were lost or destroyed, but Amenhotep's account survived because he deposited it in the archives of the Serapeum before disappearing into the chaos. French archaeologist Gaston Maspero discovered this papyrus in Archaeology 2, buried in a sealed jar beneath the Serapeum's ruins. The text is fragmentary, damaged by time and moisture, but certain passages remain chillingly clear. The Queen spoke the ancient formula. She released the guardians from their binding. Captain Kenti understood then what service we were truly called to perform, not to protect the temples, but to ensure no one interfered with what the temples would release. Kenti deploys his forces throughout the temple district just after sunset on August 10th. His men establish positions at key intersections, ostensibly to prevent Roman penetration into the sacred precincts. But Amenhotep's account suggests their true purpose was different. They were to contain whatever emerged from the temples, to prevent civilians from wandering into the district, and most crucially, to ensure that once Roman forces entered the temple complexes, none would leave to warn their comrades. It was a suicide mission wrapped in the language of strategic defense, and Kenti, a professional soldier who had fought in desert campaigns and naval battles, understood this perfectly. His deployment patterns reflect it. His men face outward from the temple district, their backs to the sanctuaries, as though the threat they were guarding against would come from outside, not within. The Roman advance into the temple district begins around the 9th hour of the night. A century of legionaries under Tribune Gaius Cornelius Sulla, tasked with securing and cataloguing the temple's wealth, pushes past Kenti's outer positions with minimal resistance. This surprises the Romans. They expect determined opposition, perhaps a final stand by Cleopatra's loyalists. Instead, they encounter token resistance, then withdrawal. Kenti's forces melt back into the narrow streets, allowing the Romans to penetrate deeper into the temple complex. Amenhotep records this with disturbing clarity. Captain Kenti gave the order to fall back. We withdrew to the secondary positions. Behind us, we heard the Romans forcing the temple doors. And then we heard the doors of Sekhmet's sanctuary open from within, though no human hand touched them. What happened in the next hour would be pieced together only from the testimony of survivors: 3 Roman soldiers who fled the temple district in terror, and a handful of Kenti's guardsmen who lived to report what they witnessed. Captain Kenti himself was never found. Neither were 117 of his men. The official Roman casualty report, drafted 3 days later with notable brevity, lists 83 legionaries as missing, presumed dead in the temple district action. But the unofficial accounts, the letters home, the whispered stories among the ranks, tell a different story. They speak of something that moved through the darkness between the temple columns, something that killed with a precision and fury that no human warrior could match, something that left bodies torn apart with wounds no sword or spear could have inflicted. A century of Roman legionaries under the command of Tribune Gaius, Marius' distant relative, of the famous general pushes into the Racotes district with orders to secure all temples and confiscate any treasures within. They are veterans of Gaul and Germania, men who have burned druid groves and torn down Celtic shrines without consequence. To them, the Temple of Sekhmet is just another foreign superstition, another building to be cleared and catalogued. The priests bar the doors and refuse entry. Marius orders them dragged aside. Axes bite into cedarwood doors carved with protective spells. The Romans laugh at the priests' warnings about divine retribution. The laughter stops when the doors finally break open and torchlight reveals the interior. The outer courtyard appears empty, abandoned in haste. Offering bowls still contain incense, still smoldering, though the priests claim to have fled hours ago. Bronze censers swing gently on their chains, as if recently disturbed, though no wind penetrates this deep into the temple complex. The soldiers' torches cast dancing shadows across columns covered in hieroglyphic inscriptions. Warnings later translations would reveal about the consequences of disturbing Sekhmet's sanctuary. But Tribune Marius cannot read Egyptian scripts, and even if he could, he has his orders. Octavian wants inventories of all temple treasures, and Marius intends to deliver them. The hypostyle hall beyond the courtyard is where unease begins to settle over the legionaries. The forest of columns, packed closely together, creates a maze of shadows that torchlight cannot fully penetrate. The ceiling is lost in darkness above them, and there is a smell not the expected mustiness of an ancient temple, but something else, something the veterans recognize from battlefields, the copper salt scent of fresh blood. Yet they see no bodies, no signs of violence. Just that smell, growing stronger as they advance deeper into the temple. Marius orders his men forward in standard formation, shields locked, gladii drawn, moving as a disciplined unit. This is what Roman military training has perfected: coordinated movement, mutual protection, overwhelming force applied systematically. It has conquered Gaul, Germania, Greece, and now Egypt. But the formation begins to falter as they push between the columns. The close spacing breaks their line. They must proceed in smaller groups, losing the cohesion that makes them formidable. And in that moment of confusion, something moves in the darkness between the columns. The first soldier dies without making a sound. One moment he is there, torch raised, peering into the shadows ahead. The next, he is gone, simply vanished from his position in the line. His torch clatters to the stone floor, still burning. His companions call his name, turn, and find nothing. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just an empty space where a man stood seconds before. Then they notice the drag marks on the floor, parallel grooves in the stone leading away into the darkness, and at the edge of the torchlight, something wet and dark pooling around the base of a column. Marius orders a halt, calls for more torches. The formation tightens, soldiers pressing together, shields raised, scanning the darkness. They can hear something now breathing heavy and rhythmic, coming from multiple directions at once, echoing between the columns in a way that makes it impossible to pinpoint the source. And then the eyes appear. They glow in the torchlight like polished gold, reflecting the flames with an intensity no natural animal's eyes should possess. Multiple pairs, moving at shoulder height for a man, circling the Roman formation just beyond clear visibility. The breathing grows louder, closer, and with it comes a sound that freezes the veterans in place, a low, rumbling vocalization, halfway between a lion's growl and something else, something that carries an almost vocal quality, as if forming words in a language older than Latin or Greek or Egyptian. Tribune Marius, to his credit, does not order retreat. He commands his men to advance toward the inner sanctuary to complete their mission. It is the last order he ever gives. What emerges from the darkness between the columns is too large to be a lion, too purposeful in its movement to be any natural predator. The torchlight catches it in fragments, muscles rippling beneath tawny fur, claws the length of daggers, and a face that is leonine but wrong somehow, too intelligent, too focused, with those golden eyes that hold not animal hunger, but something terrifyingly close to judgment. The screaming begins then, and does not stop for some time. The inner sanctum of Sekhmet's temple should be empty except for her cult statue and the offerings laid before it. But as Roman soldiers advance past the outer halls, their torches illuminating walls, covered with images of the goddess destroying Egypt's enemies, something changes in the air. The temperature rises noticeably, though it's already the heat of an Egyptian summer night. A smell fills the corridor, not the musty scent of old incense, but something alive and predatory. The musk of a great cat combined with the metallic tang of heated metal. Marcus Aurelius, a Greek-educated officer attached to Marius's command for his language skills, notes these details in his later account with the precision of a man trying to make sense of the impossible. Aurelius's testimony, preserved in a letter to his brother in Athens and later copied by the scholar Plutarch, provides our most detailed account of what the Romans encountered. He describes the progression into the temple's interior with almost clinical detachment, perhaps the only way his rational mind could process what he witnessed. The corridor to the inner sanctuary narrowed as we advanced, he writes, forcing us into single file. The walls here were not carved but painted, depicting Sekhmet in her aspect as destroyer striding across fields of corpses, her jaws dripping blood, her eyes blazing like the sun itself. Tribune Marius remarked that the paintings seemed fresh, as though recently completed, though the priests claimed this sanctuary had been sealed for months. The bronze doors to the inner sanctum were massive, each leaf perhaps 12 feet high and decorated with protective symbols hammered into the metal. But they stood already open, not broken or forced, Aurelius emphasizes, but opened from within, the internal locking bars withdrawn and lying on the floor. The centurion who examined them noted they were warm to the touch, warmer than bronze should be even in summer heat, as though fire had recently heated them. Beyond the threshold, darkness, absolute torchlight seemed to dim as it crossed that boundary, as though the sanctuary itself consumed illumination. Tribune Marius ordered 5 men forward with torches, while he and Aurelius followed. What they saw as their light penetrated the chamber made no immediate sense. The cult statue's pedestal stood empty, not toppled or destroyed, but empty, as though its burden had simply risen and walked away. The granite base bore marks consistent with enormous weight having pressed upon it for centuries, yet that weight was gone. More disturbing were the offerings scattered before the pedestal, fresh meat, still warm, though the priests swore no offerings had been presented in days. Beer and wine pooled on the floor, the vessels shattered, but the liquid had a strange consistency and color that made Aurelius certain it was not what it appeared to be. Then they noticed the walls. Every surface of the inner sanctum was covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions, layers upon layers of them, as though generations of priests had added new spells and prayers to contain something that required ever stronger binding. Aurelius, who could read basic hieratic script, recognized words repeated throughout: containment, binding, pacification, appeasement, and one phrase that appeared with disturbing frequency: let her not wake in anger. The breathing started as a low rumble that they felt in their chests before they heard it. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the stone itself. The torches flickered despite the still air. One of the legionaries, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, backed toward the door with his shield raised, muttering prayers to Mars and Jupiter. Aurelius records his own reaction with painful honesty. I understood then that we were not alone in that chamber, that we had never been alone since crossing the temple's threshold. Something vast shared that space with us, something that had watched us violate its sanctuary with a patience that was somehow more terrifying than immediate violence would have been. The temperature continued to rise. Sweat poured down faces, armor became uncomfortable to touch. And then, from the darkness beyond their torchlight, came a sound that Aurelius struggles to describe, a vocalization that combined a lion's roar with something almost like speech, as though the growl itself carried meaning, carried words in a language that predated human civilization. The syllables, if that's what they were, seemed to vibrate in the bones, to bypass the ears entirely and resonate directly in the skull. Tribune Marius, his own voice shaking but still maintaining command discipline, ordered a withdrawal. As the soldiers backed toward the door, keeping their shields raised and their eyes on the darkness, Aurelius saw something that he swears by all gods, both Greek and Roman, actually happened. The shadows in the sanctuary moved independently of the torchlight, flowing like liquid across the walls and floor, converging into a shape that was leonine but impossibly large, with eyes that opened like golden furnaces in the darkness. That was when the screaming began in the hypostyle hall behind them, and they realized with horror that whatever had awakened in the sanctuary had not been content to remain there. The first Roman dies without seeing his killer. One moment he is advancing down the hypostyle hall, sword drawn, calling for others to follow. The next moment his throat is open and he is falling, his blood black in the torchlight, spraying across hieroglyphs that seem to drink it in. His companions freeze, trying to locate the attacker in the forest of columns. The torches reveal nothing. Then another scream, this time from the rear of their formation. When they turn, a third soldier is down, his chest caved in with a single massive blow. Whatever is killing them moves between the columns faster than they can track, striking from darkness and vanishing before torchlight can catch it. Marcus Aurelius, still with the forward group near the sanctuary, hears the commotion behind them and turns to see chaos erupting in the hypostyle hall. The disciplined Roman formation, that machine of conquest that has subdued half the known world, disintegrates in moments. Soldiers spin in circles, shields raised in every direction, stabbing at shadows, calling warnings to comrades who are no longer there. The torches, held high to illuminate the threat, instead create more shadows, more places for something to hide. And the columns, those massive stone pillars covered in prayers and warnings, provide perfect concealment for a predator that knows this ground intimately. The pattern of attack reveals tactical intelligence that no animal should possess. The creature and both survivors and later investigators will struggle with whether to call it a creature, an entity, or something else entirely targets the Romans holding torches first. One by one, the light sources are extinguished, not by wind, but by the deliberate killing of every man carrying flame. Each death is swift, surgical, precisely calculated to create maximum psychological impact. A torchbearer's arm is severed at the shoulder, the limb still gripping the torch falling to the ground where it continues to burn, illuminating nothing useful. Another torchbearer simply disappears upward, his screams cut short, blood raining down from the darkness near the ceiling where no one thinks to look. Centurion Flavius Cata, second in command after Tribune Marius, attempts to restore order with parade ground discipline. He bellows commands, trying to rally the men into testudo formation shields interlocked overhead and on all sides, creating a mobile fortress that has broken cavalry charges and archer volleys. For a moment, it almost works. 20 men snap into formation, shields locked, moving as one unit toward the exit. Then something hits the formation from the side with such force that shields shatter and men are thrown bodily against columns. The testudo breaks apart like a clay pot dropped on stone. What Aurelius sees in that moment, illuminated by a falling torch, will haunt him for the remainder of his life. The creature is massive, he estimates it at 8 or 9 feet in length, not counting the tail, with shoulders that would reach a tall man's chest. The body is unmistakably leonine, powerful haunches, retractable claws that score the stone floor with each step, a tawny pelt that seems to absorb and reflect torchlight in ways that make it difficult to focus on. But the head is wrong too large in proportion to the body, too broad through the skull, with a muzzle that seems almost capable of human expression. And those eyes, golden and blazing, track the Romans with an intelligence that transforms fear into something deeper, the existential terror of being prey to something that thinks. The creature moves through the remaining formation with methodical efficiency. There is no frenzy, no animal bloodlust. Each kill is purposeful, almost ritualistic. Claws open throats or disembowel with single strikes. Jaws close on necks with crushing force, and Aurelius hears bones snap like dry wood. Some soldiers attempt to fight gladii strike out, spears thrust toward the shape moving between them. Steel rings against something, sparks fly, but the creature seems unbothered by blows that should wound or kill any living thing. Tribune Marius, to his credit, does not flee. He plants himself between the creature and his men, gladius in hand, and issues a formal challenge in Latin. The creature stops. For a long moment, it regards the tribune with those burning eyes, head tilted in what might be curiosity or contempt. Then it moves forward, not in a rush, but in a walk, deliberate and unhurried, closing the distance between them with the confidence of something that has never known defeat. What happens next occurs too quickly for Aurelius to fully process. Marius strikes a textbook thrust aimed at the chest, the killing blow that Roman training drills into every legionary. The blade should penetrate, should sink hilt deep. Instead, it skitters across the creature's shoulder, deflected as though striking bronze armor rather than flesh. The creature's response is instantaneous. One massive paw swipes across Marius's midsection with such force that the tribune folds in half and flies backward 10 feet, crashing into a column and sliding to the ground, leaving a dark smear on the stone behind him. Aurelius runs. He is not proud of this, he writes in his account, but he is alive because of it. Behind him, the screaming continues for several more minutes before finally, mercifully stopping. Marcus Aurelius backs against a wall covered with protective spells, his gladius raised uselessly, watching his companions die one by one with surgical precision. Each kill is efficient throat, heart, or a skull-crushing blow that drops a man instantly. This is not the random violence of an animal. This is a hunter who understands anatomy and chooses her strikes accordingly. Then, for just a moment, she pauses in a shaft of moonlight falling through a high window. Marcus sees her fully. The body of a lion, but larger, massively built, muscles rippling under fur that seems to shimmer with heat haze. The head leonine, but with an intelligence in the eyes that pins him like a specimen. The solar disk on her head gleaming as if lit from within. She should be granite and gold leaf, a statue in a sanctuary. She is flesh and fury and divine purpose made manifest. The moonlight reveals details that torch flame could not. The creature, no, Aurelius corrects himself in his testimony, not a creature, she, for there is nothing bestial about this presence, stands perhaps 4 feet at the shoulder, but her head, raised and alert, reaches nearly 7 feet. The proportions are wrong for any natural lion, the forequarters too massive, the shoulders too broad, the neck too thick with muscle. Her pelt is not the uniform tan of Egyptian lions, but darker, almost reddish gold in the moonlight, and where the light catches it directly, it seems to shimmer as though heat radiates from the skin beneath. Most unsettling are the markings, dark streaks along her flanks and legs that resolve as Aurelius's eyes adjust into patterns that mirror the hieroglyphic inscriptions covering the temple walls' protective spells and binding formulas seemingly inscribed directly onto her body, as though her very flesh is text, story, and warning combined. But it is the head that destroys any hope that this is merely an animal, no matter how large or strange. The muzzle is leonine, powerful jaws capable of crushing bone, whiskers that twitch with each breath, a black nose wet with blood from her recent kills. Yet the skull structure is subtly wrong, the cranium too broad and domed, suggesting a brain cavity far larger than any lion's. The ears, alert and mobile, track sounds from multiple directions with predatory precision. And then there are the eyes. They glow. Not reflect torchlight, not catch moonbeams, they glow from within, a molten golden light that seems to emanate from some internal furnace. Aurelius, trained in Greek natural philosophy, tries to rationalize this as some trick of reflection, some property of the eye's structure that creates an illusion of luminescence. But no rationalization survives the moment when those eyes fix directly upon him and he feels the full weight of their regard. There is consciousness there. He will later testify not the awareness of a hunting beast tracking prey, but something far more terrible. Recognition, evaluation, judgment. She sees him not as food or threat, but as something she is deciding whether to destroy or spare, and the decision is being made according to criteria he cannot begin to comprehend. Around her neck hangs the USEC collar, the broad ceremonial necklace worn by Egyptian royalty and deities in temple reliefs. But this is no carved representation or golden ornament. It appears to be part of her, growing from her body like natural armor, composed of what might be overlapping scales or feathers or something else entirely, gleaming with a dark metallic sheen that shifts between bronze and gold and copper as she moves. Above this rises the solar disk, the symbol of her divine authority, positioned on her head exactly as it appears in every temple carving of Sekhmet throughout Egypt. Yet this disk is no ceremonial headdress. It hovers above her skull, rotating slowly, radiating actual heat that Aurelius can feel from 20 feet away, and illuminating the chamber with a ruddy light that makes the bloodstains on the floor look black. She regards him for what feels like an eternity, but is perhaps 5 heartbeats. Her breathing is deep and regular, almost meditative, with none of the panting or excitement that a lion displays after a kill. Blood drips from her jaws, the blood of his comrades, but she makes no move to feed. This is not hunger. This has never been about hunger. Her tail, thick and tufted at the end, lashes once, twice with the measured rhythm of someone thinking, deciding, weighing options. Then she does something that breaks Aurelius's mind more completely than the killing has. She sits. Like a cat settling on a doorstep, she lowers her haunches to the blood-slicked floor, wraps her tail around her forepaws, and continues to observe him with those burning eyes. The posture is simultaneously feline and utterly wrong. No hunting predator pauses like this in the midst of prey. No animal adopts this position of regal composure while surrounded by carnage. She sits like a pharaoh on a throne, like a judge at a tribunal, like a goddess in her temple receiving a supplicant who has displeased her. Aurelius realizes, with a clarity that cuts through his terror, that she is waiting for something. Not deciding whether to kill him, that decision has already been made, apparently in the negative, at least for now. She is waiting for him to understand something, to acknowledge something, to fulfill some requirement that exists in a framework of rules he doesn't know. His Greek education, his Roman discipline, his natural philosophy, none of it provides any guidance for this moment. So he does the only thing his paralyzed mind can conceive. He drops his gladius, goes to his knees, and bows his head in the Egyptian manner, arms extended, palms down, exactly as he has seen Egyptian subjects prostrate themselves before Ptolemaic rulers. It is not a Roman gesture. Romans kneel. to no one but he is not in Rome's world anymore. He is in Egypt's world, in the world of gods and temples and forces that predate his civilization by millennia. When he dares to look up, she is gone. The moonlit space where she sat is empty, as though she had never been there at all. But the bodies of his companions remain, and the blood and the claw marks scored deep into stone, and he knows with absolute certainty that what he has witnessed was real. The survivors flee the temple in panic, but Sekhmet does not remain confined to her sanctuary. Throughout the night, reports filter back to Roman command of impossible sightings. A massive lioness moving through the burning streets, but no arrows touch her and no spear finds its mark. Roman soldiers dying in alleyways with their throats torn out, their weapons still sheathed because they never saw what killed them. Egyptian civilians reporting a golden figure moving across rooftops, visible for a moment in silhouette against the flames before vanishing. Tribune Marius dismisses these reports as panic and confusion. Marcus Aurelius, blood-soaked and shaking, tries to explain what he saw in the temple. Marius calls him mad. By dawn, 15 more Roman soldiers are dead, all in the temple district, all killed with the same surgical precision. The pattern of deaths that night suggests something far more disturbing than random violence. Sekhmet is hunting according to a specific criterion. The victims are exclusively Roman military personnel who participated in temple desecration, soldiers who forced entry into sanctuaries, who dragged priests from altars, who looted religious artifacts or defaced sacred spaces. Egyptian civilians moving through the same streets remain untouched. Even Roman civilians, merchants and bureaucrats who stayed in their quarters, survive unharmed. But legionaries, even those who merely stood guard, while others committed the actual violations, die wherever she finds them. Centurion Marcus Licinius Crassus, commanding a squad stationed near the Serapeum, provides a detailed account in his official report, one of the few such documents to survive, because he, unlike many of his fellow officers, lived through the night. His squad of 8 men was bivouacked in a commandeered Egyptian house, guards posted at the doors, when the attack came. No warning, Crassus writes. The sentry at the front door simply ceased his pacing. We found him seconds later, his neck broken, laid carefully against the wall as though he was sleeping. The rear sentry died as we searched for the first. We heard nothing, no sound of struggle or alarm, just his body falling. Then we saw her. Crassus describes Sekhmet moving through the house with the confidence of something that knows it cannot be stopped. His men formed a defensive line, shields locked, spears extended, standard procedure for close quarters fighting. She walked directly into the spear points. The weapons should have impaled her, should have stopped her charge. Instead, Crassus reports, the spear points bent or broke against her chest, as though striking bronze plate rather than flesh. It was like watching someone walk through hanging tapestries, he writes. The weapons simply did not matter to her. What followed was systematic elimination. She moved through the defensive line, batting aside shields with casual swipes of her paws, each strike delivered with such force that the men holding the shields were thrown backward. Crassus watched her kill 4 of his men in perhaps 10 heartbeats, each death delivered with a single precise blow, claws across the throat, jaws closing on the back of the neck, a paw strike to the temple that dropped a man like a felled ox. The remaining soldiers broke and fled through different exits. Crassus escaped through a window, hearing his last 2 men dying behind him as he ran. But the most disturbing detail in his report concerns what happened after the killing stopped. Crassus, hiding in an adjacent building's roof space, watched Sekhmet emerge from the house. She sat in the street, illuminated by the fires burning throughout the district, and began to clean herself, licking blood from her paws with the fastidious attention any cat displays after feeding. Except she was not feeding. She had killed 8 men and consumed nothing, taken no trophy, displayed no interest in the bodies. The blood cleaning was purely ritualistic, almost ceremonial, as though the act of killing required this formal conclusion before she could move on to her next objective. Throughout the night, similar patterns emerge. A patrol of 6 legionaries dies in a narrow street between the Temple of Isis and a granary, all killed within moments of each other. their bodies arranged in a neat line as though she had worked down the formation methodically, one after another. A squad guarding a commandeered treasury finds 3 of their number dead at their posts when dawn comes, killed silently, while their companions sat mere feet away, hearing nothing. Near the harbor, a sentry attempting to prevent Egyptian ships from leaving encounters something in the darkness that kills 12 men before the unit breaks and retreats to the docks, abandoning their positions entirely. Egyptian witnesses, interviewed later by both Roman authorities and by the Greek historians who documented Alexandria's fall, provide accounts that Roman officials largely dismiss as superstition or propaganda. But these accounts are remarkably consistent. A massive lioness moving through the burning city, her eyes glowing like furnaces, a solar disk hovering above her head, leaving Roman dead in her wake, while Egyptian civilians watch unmolested from doorways and windows. An old priest, one of the few who remained in the city after Cleopatra's death, tells the historian Strabo that what Romans encountered was Maat, restoring itself, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, reasserting itself against chaos and violation. By dawn on August 11th, the temple district is effectively a no-go zone for Roman forces. Octavian, receiving reports of mounting casualties and increasingly bizarre explanations for them, orders his commanders to cease operations in that quarter until the situation is clarified. The official explanation given to the legions is that Egyptian insurgents are using the temple complex for guerrilla warfare. But the officers who survived encounters with Sekhmet know better. They have seen what natural weapons cannot touch, what military discipline cannot defeat, what 3 centuries of Roman conquest have never prepared them to face, a god who has decided to participate directly in the affairs of mortals. While Roman accounts are fragmentary and often suppressed, Egyptian sources preserved by temple priests provide more detail. Captain Kenty, who watched from a distance as Romans entered Sekhmet's temple, describes seeing the goddess emerge in her full fury. He uses the ancient titles with reverence: Neset, the flame, Wajet Netet, the papyrus-colored one. He describes how she moved through the streets with purpose, ignoring Egyptian civilians entirely while hunting Roman soldiers with focused intent. The priests of Sekhmet's temple, who survived the initial assault, claim they performed no rituals to summon her. They suggest instead that Sekhmet awakened herself, responding to Egypt's mortal danger. In Egyptian theology, this makes sense. She is the Eye of Ra, sent forth when divine order is threatened. Rome's conquest of Egypt, the end of pharaonic rule, the burning of sacred sites, these were threats enough. Captain Kentis' testimony, preserved in Amenhotep's chronicle, provides the perspective of a trained military observer who understood both warfare and Egyptian religious tradition. He describes positioning his men on rooftops surrounding the temple complex, not to fight, but to witness and document what the Romans' desecration would unleash. "We heard the Roman axes breaking the cedar doors," he records. "We heard their laughter as the priests warned them. Then we heard the silence when the laughter stopped. Then we heard the screaming." From his vantage point, Kenty could see into the temple's outer courtyard through the broken doors. He describes Sekhmet's emergence not as a sudden appearance, but as a gradual manifestation, as though she was crossing from one state of being into another. First there was darkness in the doorway, deeper than natural shadow. Then eyes within that darkness, burning like the forge fires we use for bronze. Then she stepped forward into the torchlight, and the Romans saw what their violation had awakened. "I have fought lions in the desert, hunted them when they threatened villages." What emerged from that temple was lion-shaped, but not lion. She moved with purpose that no beast possesses. She killed with precision that only a warrior knows. The priests who survived 3 elderly men who had fled to a neighboring sanctuary when the Romans approached provide theological context that Roman observers completely lacked. The high priest, Pascharin Peter, interviewed later by Greek scholars compiling histories of Alexandria's fall, explains that Sekhmet's cult statues were never mere representations but anchors, focal points where the goddess's power could be contained and directed through ritual. "We fed her daily with prayers and offerings," he states. "We pacified her with beer and incense. We reminded her through ritual that humanity had learned its lesson. that we would not rebel against divine order again. For 3,000 years, this arrangement held. Then the Romans broke the doors. They violated the sanctuary. They laughed at our warnings. And the containment that we had maintained for millennia simply ended. Another priest, Jed Konsu Ayuf Ankh, provides disturbing details about the condition of Sekhmet's sanctuary after her emergence. He returned to the temple 3 days after the attack, when Roman forces had withdrawn from the district entirely, and performed a ritual survey of the damage. The cult statue was gone, he reports. Not toppled or stolen, the Romans never reached it. Simply gone, as though it had walked away. But more troubling were the marks we found. The pedestal where the statue had stood for centuries showed evidence that the granite had softened, had become plastic, like clay. The goddess's paws had pressed into the stone as she rose, leaving perfect impressions. We measured these impressions. They were far larger than any lion's, each pad the size of a man's head, claws that left gouges as deep as my forearm. Egyptian civilian witnesses, numerous enough that their accounts cannot be dismissed as coordinated fabrication, describe Sekhmet moving through the city with evident purpose and discrimination. A wine merchant named Pak Hem, whose shop stood near the intersection where Centurion Crassus's squad died, watched the entire encounter from his upper window. She came down the street like a pharaoh inspecting troops, he tells the Greek historian Strabo. Not rushing, not hunting the way lions hunt gazelle, walking with her head high, her tail straight, moving toward the house where the Romans had taken shelter. I saw her enter. I heard the screaming brief, then silent. She emerged and sat in the street, cleaning herself as cats do. Then she looked directly up at my window. I froze, certain I would die, but she simply regarded me for a moment, then continued down the street. It was as though she was telling me, "You are Egyptian. You are not my concern this night." Multiple Egyptian sources emphasize this selective targeting with a consistency that suggests accuracy rather than embellishment. Sekhmet killed Romans exclusively, specifically Romans who had participated in temple violations or the military conquest of sacred sites. She passed Egyptian civilians without acknowledgement, as one might pass furniture or architecture present but irrelevant to her purpose. This selectivity, the Egyptian witnesses insist, proves her divine nature. An animal cannot distinguish between Egyptian and Roman, cannot determine who has violated sacred law and who has not. Only a goddess executing divine judgment could hunt with such precise discrimination. Perhaps most significantly, the Egyptian accounts uniformly describe Sekhmet not as rampaging but as executing. Each kill was deliberate, considered, proportional. The priests use the term sihem, which translates roughly as righteous destruction or the power to punish, not random violence, but targeted correction of imbalance. She did not destroy because she was angry, High Priest Pasharan Peter explains. She destroyed because she is the instrument through which Ma'at cosmic order restores itself when humans create Isfit chaos. The Romans created Isfit by conquering Egypt, by ending the line of pharaohs, by violating temples. Sekhmet simply corrected the imbalance in the only way she knows, through violence that is absolute, focused, and unavoidable. Captain Kentis' final observation in his testimony carries particular weight. He describes watching Sekhmet throughout the night from various positions, tracking her movement through the burning city. She was not lost or confused, he states. She knew exactly where she was going, which Romans to target, which paths to take. It was as though she carried a map in her mind of every violation committed, every sacred boundary crossed, and was methodically addressing each one. By dawn, she had killed everyone who had forced entry into temples, everyone who had dragged priests from altars, everyone who had stolen sacred objects. Then she simply vanished. Not fleeing, not hiding, she walked into the desert south of the city and disappeared, her purpose apparently fulfilled. As dawn breaks over Alexandria, the killings stop. Roman patrols entering the temple district in force, backed by Syrian archers and ready for whatever beast or organized resistance they might face, find only bodies and blood-soaked stone. The temple of Sekhmet stands open, its inner sanctum violated but empty of life. The cult statue remains in place, black granite, golden eyes, solar disk gleaming in the morning light. Priests are found huddled in side chambers, alive and unharmed. They refuse to answer Roman questions, speaking only in ancient Egyptian which few of Octavian's men understand. Marcus Aurelius, returning to the temple in daylight with his sword still drawn, examines the statue with new wariness. In his account he notes something strange. The granite around the statue's pores is warm to the touch, though the rest of the stone is cool. And there are marks on the floor, deep scratches in limestone that were not present in Roman surveys done before the conquest. The transformation, if that is what occurred, leaves physical evidence that Roman investigators cannot explain away. The pedestal beneath the cult statue shows alterations that should be impossible in solid granite. Where the statue's pores rest, the stone appears to have softened and reformed, creating depressions that perfectly match the weight distribution of something that had stood there, then departed, then returned. A Greek engineer named Philon, brought in by Octavian's command to assess structural damage throughout Alexandria, examines these impressions with growing confusion. Granite does not behave this way, he writes in his technical report. It cannot be pressed into like clay and then resolidify. Yet these impressions are genuine. They penetrate nearly 2 inches into the stone. The weight required to create such depressions would be immense, and the process by which the stone softened and then hardened again defies all principles of natural philosophy I have been taught. More disturbing are the bloodstains. The hypostyle hall and outer courtyard are drenched in Roman blood enough that it pools in the low spots of the floor and runs in dark rivers toward the drainage channels. Yet inside the inner sanctuary, where the cult statue stands, there is no blood at all. The threshold between the two spaces shows a stark division. Blood coating every surface up to the sanctuary doorway, then absolutely nothing beyond it, as though some invisible barrier prevented the blood from crossing into the goddess's presence. The Roman dead, 83 bodies in total when the final count is completed, are all found in the outer areas of the temple complex. Not one corpse lies within the sanctuary itself. Marcus Aurelius, standing before the cult statue in the clear light of morning, tries to reconcile what he sees with what he experienced in darkness. The statue appears exactly as it should, black granite polished smooth, carved with the precision that Egyptian sculptors perfected over millennia. The leonine features are stern but static, frozen in stone as they have been for centuries. The golden eyes sheets of gold leaf carefully applied to carved recesses catch the dawn light streaming through high windows but do not glow from within. The solar disk above her head is metal worked over stone, an inanimate object, not the burning orb he witnessed rotating and radiating heat. Everything about the statue suggests permanence, immobility, the dead weight of stone that has not moved and cannot move. Yet when he places his hand against the granite of her foreleg, he feels warmth. Not the warmth of stone that has absorbed summer heat. The sun has barely risen, and this chamber remains in shadow. This is deeper warmth, the warmth of something living, as though blood still moves through veins beneath the granite surface. He jerks his hand back and notices something else, the faintest scent of copper and musk, the same smell that filled the temple during the night's horror. Stone should not retain scent. Stone should not radiate heat. Stone should not have fresh scratches on the floor leading to and from its pedestal, marks that suggest massive weight moving, departing, and returning. The priests, when finally coerced into speaking through translators, provide no clarity. High Priest Pasharen Peter, interrogated by a Greek officer fluent in Egyptian, responds to questions about the night's events with theological explanations that mean nothing to Roman ears. Sekhmet went forth, he states simply. She performed her function. She returned to rest. This is the proper cycle. This is how it has always been when the need arises. When pressed about whether the statue animated or whether some beast impersonated the goddess, he becomes agitated. You ask the wrong question with the wrong understanding. The statue does not contain Sekhmet. Sekhmet allows herself to be contained by the statue when she chooses, when the proper rituals maintain that choice. You broke the rituals. She chose otherwise. Now the rituals are restored, and she chooses containment again. Be grateful. Roman authorities, faced with 83 dead soldiers, a terrorized occupation force, and a situation that defies rational explanation, make a decision that will shape how this event is remembered, or rather, forgotten. Octavian himself, informed of the details by his most trusted officers, orders a comprehensive suppression of the incident. The official casualty reports are amended. Deaths are attributed to insurgent action or accident during temple clearing operations. Marcus Aurelius is ordered to revise his account, removing all references to animated statues or leonine creatures. He complies in his official report, but preserves the true version in his personal letter to his brother, which survives because it was copied by later historians fascinated by Alexandria's mysteries. The Temple of Sekhmet is sealed by Roman order not destroyed, notably, but sealed, with guards posted to prevent any entry whatsoever. This decision suggests that Roman command, despite their public dismissal of supernatural explanations, privately believes that something in that sanctuary requires containment. The cult statue remains in place, undisturbed, a fact that Egyptian priests note with grim satisfaction. They learned, Jed Konsuayuf Ankh observes in his chronicle, not what she is, perhaps, not why she acts, but they learned that some powers require respect, not conquest. They learned that Egypt's gods are not abstractions to be dismissed or decorations to be looted. They learned, finally, to leave Sekhmet's sanctuary alone. The physical evidence, the warm granite, the impossible depressions in stone, the blood that stops at sacred thresholds remains unexplained in Roman records. Modern archaeologists, examining the site centuries later, find the same anomalies. Where patterns on the sanctuary floor consistent with something massive having moved repeatedly across the stone, scratch marks too deep and too precisely parallel to be tool marks or natural erosion, and granite that shows signs of having been subjected to heat and pressure that should have fractured it, but instead left it intact and reformed. As the sun climbs higher over Alexandria, casting light into chambers that witnessed horror in darkness, the cult statue of Sekhmet sits in silent granite repose, her golden eyes reflecting nothing but the morning light, her stone form offering no answer to the questions that will haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. What exactly happened in this temple? Where does the boundary lie between statue and goddess, between representation and reality? And most disturbing of all, is she truly stone again, or merely waiting? Octavian's official reports make no mention of divine intervention or supernatural killings. The deaths of Roman soldiers in the temple district are attributed to Egyptian guerrilla resistance, a last desperate strike by Cleopatra's remaining loyalists. Marcus Aurelius's detailed account is filed away, preserved only because his family is influential enough that his testimony cannot be completely destroyed. Later copyists, more credulous, or perhaps more honest, preserve fragments in margins and footnotes. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, converting the old temples into churches centuries later, will remember the story and add their own interpretations. Perhaps the old gods fought one last time against Roman paganism, or perhaps demons took advantage of chaos to sow terror. But the Egyptian perspective, preserved in temple archives and later transcribed by Arab scholars, tells a simpler story. Sekhmet walked when Egypt bled. She remembered her purpose. She reminded Rome that Egypt's gods were not mere statues to be catalogued and shipped to Italian villas. The suppression of information begins within days of the incident. Octavian, soon to become Augustus Caesar, demonstrates the political instinct that will make him Rome's most effective emperor. He understands that certain truths are more dangerous than useful. Soldiers who survived the Temple District massacre are quietly reassigned to distant postings: Britain, Germania, the Parthian frontier places, where their stories will be dismissed as the fantasies of traumatized men far from verification. Officers who filed reports mentioning unexplainable phenomena receive polite corrections from higher command, their documents returned with suggestions for more tactically focused revisions. The official history, commissioned by Augustus himself and written by approved scholars, reduces the entire Alexandria campaign to a brief paragraph. The city fell, Cleopatra died, resistance was minimal. Yet the truth bleeds through in unexpected places. Roman soldiers writing private letters home described the temple district as cursed ground, where entire squads vanished and screams echoed through the night. A century after the events, the historian Tacitus, researching Augustus's early career, finds curious gaps in the military records from Alexandria 3 full days in August 30 BCE, where casualty reports are missing or heavily redacted, where unit deployments suddenly shift without explanation, where the usual meticulous accounting of Roman military bureaucracy simply stops. In his annals, Tacitus notes these absences but offers no explanation, perhaps aware that some questions, even a century later, remain politically dangerous. The physical evidence proves harder to suppress. The temple of Sekhmet, sealed by Roman order and guarded for decades, becomes a source of persistent rumors among Alexandria's Egyptian population. Guards assigned to the temple report strange phenomena sounds from within the sealed chambers, the smell of incense though no one has entered to burn it, and most disturbingly, the sensation of being watched by something that does not appreciate their presence. Centurion Gaius Petronius, commanding the temple guard in 20 BCE 10 years after the incident, submits a request for reassignment that becomes part of the official archives. The men are solid veterans who have faced Germanic tribes and British chariots without flinching, yet they fear this posting more than combat duty. They claim the statue inside moves when no one is watching, that its eyes track them through sealed doors, that something paces inside the sanctuary at night. I cannot confirm these claims, but I can confirm that men who volunteer for punishment details and dangerous patrols request transfers from this temple guard. Something about this place erodes military discipline in ways I cannot explain or counteract. The Egyptian priesthoods, meanwhile, preserve their own records with characteristic thoroughness. The temple archives, maintained in secret after Rome assumes control of Egypt's religious institutions, contain detailed accounts of Sekhmet's manifestation that later scholars will find remarkably consistent. These records are copied and recopied through the Roman period, the Byzantine era, and into the Islamic period, passing through multiple hands but retaining core details that suggest an original, accurate accounting rather than mythological embellishment. When Arab scholars begin cataloging Egypt's ancient traditions in the 9th and 10th centuries CE, they encounter these records and find them detailed enough to be historical rather than purely legendary. One such account, preserved in a 12th century Arabic manuscript now housed in Cairo's Egyptian Museum, provides a theological interpretation that resonates through Egyptian understanding for centuries. The goddess Sekhmet manifested in her fullness on the night Alexandria fell, not because priests summoned her, but because the cosmic order itself was fractured. When the line of pharaohs ended, when foreign conquerors burned temples and mocked sacred traditions, when hubris reached such heights that soldiers laughed while violating the sanctuary of the Eye of Ra, at this moment, the universe demanded correction. Sekhmet is that correction. She is the fever that burns out infection, the blade that cuts away corruption, the violence that restores balance. She walked, she killed, she returned to rest. This is not miracle or curse. This is simply how Ma'at maintains itself. The Coptic Christians, inheriting Egypt's temples and transforming them into churches, develop an ambivalent relationship with the Sekhmet story. Some view it as evidence of demonic activity, spiritual warfare between pagan darkness and Christian light. Others, particularly Egyptian-born converts who remember the old traditions, see it differently as proof that Egypt itself has power, that the land and its traditions cannot be simply conquered and discarded, that even Rome's might could not wholly subjugate what Egypt had built over millennia. Several Coptic texts from the 4th and 5th centuries CE reference the night the old gods defended Egypt one final time before Christ's. Light transformed their power, suggesting a narrative that acknowledges the event while recontextualizing it within Christian theology. Modern archaeological investigations of the temple site, beginning in the 19th century and continuing to the present, have uncovered evidence that even secular scholars find difficult to explain conventionally. The claw marks in the sanctuary floor, documented by multiple independent research teams, penetrate granite to depths that require forces far exceeding what ancient tools could produce. The blood trace patterns, still faintly detectable through chemical analysis after 2 millennia, show that distinctive boundary at the sanctuary threshold that Roman reports described. And most puzzling of all, thermographic imaging conducted in the 1990s revealed that the cult statue's base, what remains of it, after centuries of damage and looting, still registers slightly warmer than surrounding stone, as though some residual heat continues to emanate from within the granite itself. The legacy of that August night in 30 BCE extends beyond historical documentation into the realm of cultural memory and military doctrine. Roman forces, for the remainder of the imperial period, approach Egyptian temples with notable caution. While Greek sanctuaries are looted wholesale and their statues shipped to Rome as trophies, Egyptian cult statues, particularly those of Sekhmet, are largely left in place. When temples are repurposed, the statues are often walled off rather than removed, sealed behind new construction, as though containment rather than possession is the wiser policy. Some military historians suggest this pattern represents Rome's unspoken acknowledgement that what happened in Alexandria could happen again, and that certain powers are better respected than challenged.